By now you've seen poems like this, and this, and this, and this, and this. But have you seen a poem like this? I mean, I guess you have if you're familiar with E. E. Cummings. Here's a small background on E. E. Cummings. He was born Edward Estlin Cummings on October 14, 1894 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Even though his name was Edward, he wasn't called Edward because that's what his father was called. His father was a minister and professor at Harvard University, and both his parents encouraged his love of language. E. E. Cummings wrote poems as early as the age of 10, and his mother kept as many of them as she could. Cummings left the United States for France as a volunteer ambulance driver in World War I. 5 months after his assignment, however, he and a friend were interned in a prison camp by the French authorities on suspicion of espionage. He recounted his jail experiences in his autobiographical novel The Enormous Room, published in 1922. Self-publishing for most of his career, he eventually found wide recognition. Now I bet you're wondering, why isn't his name capitalized? Well, you see, Mr. Cummings would sometimes write his name in lowercase in his poetry. This wasn't a sudden thing, though. Slowly he shortened his name to his initials, then wrote it completely in lowercase. However, he used uppercase when writing letters and things that weren't poetry-related. Cummings wasn't just a poet, he also painted. He is known for his poems, though, because he played wildly with form, spacing, punctuation, capitalization, pacing, and overall grammar. E. E. Cummings had a pretty busy personal life, too. He had a daughter with his friend's wife, then married her, but she quickly fell in love with someone else, so their marriage only lasted 4 months. Some of his poems are about her. After that, he remarried to a woman who just wanted his money, which he had none of, so their relationship was a disaster. When he died on September 3, 1962, he was the second most widely read poet in the United States, after the traditional Robert Frost. In this video, I plan on discussing Cummings' style and show how his style reflects on his life. I will be starting out with If. If freckles were lovely and day was night, and measles were nice and a lie weren't a lie, life would be delight, but things couldn't go right, for in such a sad plight, I wouldn't be I. If earth was heaven and now was hence, and past was present and false was true, there might be some sense, but I'd still be in suspense, for on such a sad pretense, you wouldn't be you. If fear was plucky and globes were square and dirt was cleanly and tears were glee, things would seem fair, yet they'd all despair, for if hence was there, we wouldn't be we. As you can see, this first poem I've chosen by E. E. Cummings is a poem that looks just like an ordinary poem, but Cummings had many different poems and some contain normal structure. Let me break this poem down for you a bit. The theme of this poem is if anything were any different, nobody would be the person they are today. So stop wishing the world isn't the way it is, because sometimes life just isn't fair. Like other poems, this one is full of repetition with the use of the words if and for. Blank wouldn't be blank is an example of anaphora and a paradox. This poem is also full of metaphors. It has an A-B rhyme scheme and has end rhymes. The rhyme scheme makes the poem flow well with all the metaphors. The poem also contains caesura in lines 1, 7, and 13. The lines in this poem are broken up when E. E. Cummings gets a new idea. Instead of adding a comma, he writes a new line, or sometimes even writing a dash. The next poem shows how E. E. Cummings likes to experiment with punctuation. I carry your heart with me, I carry it in. I carry your heart with me, I carry it in my heart. I am never without it. Anywhere I go, you go, my dear. And whatever is done by only me is your doing, my darling. I fear no fate, for you are my fate, my sweet. I want no world, for beautiful you are my world, my true. And it's you are whatever a moon has always meant, and whatever a sun will always sing is you. Here's the deepest secret nobody knows. Here's the root of the root, and the bud of the bud, and the sky of a tree called life, which goes higher than soul can hope or mind can hide. And this is the wonder that's keeping the stars apart. I carry your heart, I carry it in my heart. Now this poem is one of his most popular poems. It's used everywhere. In movies,
I carry it in my heart.
Items to buy someone you love, and a bunch of other things too, like weddings, but that's not the point here. I bet you're thinking, oh, it's just some poem with parentheses. What's so special about it? Even I can do that. But friends, it's a little more complicated than that. Cummings didn't just randomly add parentheses because he felt like it. He put parentheses and other punctuations and words where he did with a purpose. First, I would like to point out that this poem has several uses of enchantment. The poem is just a long run-on sentence. You may have noticed by now that there's a lack of periods and commas in this poem. In fact, there aren't any periods at all. The lack of periods and commas show unity between the speaker and their lover. Since there aren't any periods, this can symbolize how their love is everlasting, just like this sentence seems to be. This poem's theme is about love and how the speaker will always hold their lover's heart wherever they go, symbolizing their lover is always with them. The poem can be split into two parts, what is written inside the parentheses and what isn't. Now, as I said before, the theme is keeping a lover's heart contained, just like the parentheses are containing certain words. What's interesting is the words stated outside the parentheses are also within them, linking the two people in the two parts of this poem. Parentheses are normally used for information that isn't necessary, but Cummings uses them to reinforce the poem's theme. The parentheses provide intimacy between the speaker and their lover, as seen with the use of the words my dear, my darling, my sweet, and my true, which are all stated within them. The speaker addresses his lover within the parentheses, showing how personal the words within the parentheses are. Cummings also puts a secret within the parentheses, showing how deep the relationship is between the speaker and their lover. Speaking of their close relationship, notice how Cummings wrote the word I. It's written as a lowercase I. He did this in quite a few of his poems. In English, we capitalize proper nouns, but since the speaker never says his lover's name, writing capital I would show that they are, in a way, superior to them. Cummings wanted the readers to see that the speaker viewed their lover as an equal to them. Now you can see that Cummings had a reason for why he capitalized certain words and why he added punctuation where he did. Unjust. In just spring, when the world is mud luscious, the little lame balloon man whistles far and wee, and Eddie and Bill come running from marbles and piracies, and it's spring! When the world is puddle wonderful, the queer old balloon man whistles far and wee, and Betty and Isabel come dancing from hopscotch and jump rope, and it's spring! And the goat-footed balloon man whistles far and wee. This poem is discussing spring. Unlike the other poems, this one uses space to help Cummings get his idea across. Unjust is written in free verse, which allows Cummings to play with said space. The poem has several uses of enjambment as well, similar to I carry your heart with me, I carry it in. The use of space near far in line 5 can make the reader almost hear the time it takes the balloon man's whistle to reach the children. Eddie and Bill is one word, showing that they are so similar in their actions they might as well be the same person. They are both playing with marbles and then run to find the balloon man. This can also represent how excited the speaker is that it is spring. They are so excited their words combine into one. For example, if you're really excited to go to the movies, you would say, can I go to the movies? Instead of, can I go to the movies? Betty and Isabel is used in the same way. Line 9 only contains one word, putting emphasis on the word spring. Now this poem also demonstrates E. E. Cummings' choice of words better than the other two I have talked about before. Have you seen the word just spring before? No, of course not, because it's made up, just like Mud Luscious and Puddle Wonderful. E. Cummings does this to show that the poem is limitless, just like spring. By doing this, he also throws syntax out the window. In English, the adjective comes before the noun, but E. E. Cummings decides to break the rules and switch the order. Not only that, but he adds a hyphen, making the whole phrase into a big adjective. Does Robert Frost do that? No, he doesn't, because he's traditional, unlike E. E. Cummings. The sky was candy, luminous, edible, spry, pink, shy, lemons, greens, cool chocolates, under a locomotive sprouting violets. The sky was actually forms its words into what it's describing. The sky. I'm sure you remember that E. E. Cummings was also a painter. He used his talent to his advantage in this poem. He creates a visual work as well as a verbal one. Some of the words have spaces within them, and this reminded me of how gases diffuse in air. The words are breaking apart like gases do, and since the poem is discussing the sky, which is full of gases, this makes sense. None of the words are capitalized in this poem, similar to I carry your heart with me, I carry it in. The sky was is also written in free verse, just like the poem Unjust. By now you can see that Cummings breaks the rules, but he also breaks rules on his own terms. Sometimes he capitalizes letters, other times he flat out makes words up, and sometimes he likes to make a picture with his words. L''A. Before I read this poem, see if you can read it yourself. Now this poem looks barely even like a poem, but I'm going to remind you that E. Cummings was a very creative man who didn't follow any of the rules of poetry. Look at this. It's a poem with tons of enjambment. That's all. A leaf falls, homeliness. Like the sky was, this poem is also a visual art. What's even crazier about this poem is the way you read it is how a leaf falls, zigzagging through the air. E. Cummings managed to create an artwork out of only a few words. Trust me when I say there is a reason this man wrote poems the way he did. There are only a few words in this poem: loneliness and a leaf falls. If you imagine a leaf falling, it doesn't necessarily give off the image of loneliness. Maybe you think of autumn, Halloween, or death. But once embedded inside the word, you can't miss the idea that is being portrayed. And not only is the leaf lonely, but the words are broken up, making them look lonely themselves. This poem is really interesting because it leaves the reader wanting more, but there isn't any more, in a way, leaving the reader lonely. Finally, we have arrived at what seems to be the most interesting poem I will show you today. This poem is a great example of what E. Cummings is known for, and his style can be seen within it. See if you can find any shape in the poem while I read and discuss it. The poem is called RPOPHESSAGR. RPOPHESSAGR, who, as we look, upon no gath, PPEGORHRASS, ring to, the, leap, SAR, riving, GRREAPSPHOS, to, be, ran, geeingly, grasshopper. Now here's what the poem says if you unscramble all the words. Grasshopper who, as we look, upon no gathering, into the, leaps, arriving to, become a ragingly, grasshopper. The poem is written in free verse. E. Cummings once again breaks the laws of syntax. The word leap is in between two scrambled up versions of the word grasshopper, as if the grasshopper really did leap. Leap is also written in a way to emphasize itself. Unlike the other poems, this one has a non-human animal subject, a grasshopper. This may explain why the words are arranged like this. Grasshoppers' leaps seem to be random, as if they have no control over themselves. Like, what the heck, you couldn't have possibly known that that was where you're going to land after jumping 10 times your height into the air.
Jump, jump, jump up high, lift your hands up to the sky, touch your head and your knees and toes.
However, as the poem comes to a close, you can clearly see the word grasshopper, showing that this grasshopper leap isn't that random at all. After the leap is completed, and the grasshopper is back on the ground, the grasshopper is defined as a grasshopper. The semicolon at the end of the poem means that another leap will begin soon, and another cycle of confusion will follow. The shape of the poem is a grasshopper. E. Cummings decides to use his artistic experience to create another image with words. E. Cummings wrote many poems which all showed his unique style. Some people think his style improved his poems, such as George Anderson, who states, idiosyncratic and eccentric, his verse experiments with typography, slang, dialect, jazz rhythms, and jagged lines that mimic the sound or movement of his subjects. The very shape of his poems emphasize the forms of human expression. Some people didn't even think his poems should be considered poems, but he didn't care, as shown in the quote by Deborah Solomon. Cummings, however, never seemed very concerned by mixed reviews. In fact, he constantly sought to disrupt both literary and social complacency. Overall, this is what one literary critic had to say about Cummings' style. Cummings' style remained fundamentally the same throughout his writing career. He was by no means stagnant. While his aesthetic convictions did not change, he persistently worked at crafting and perfecting his method. Thus, through his genuine care, his poems have a lasting, delightful freshness about them. His father even influenced his work. Henry Bloom writes, "The poet's father, Edward Cummings, was by all accounts an impressive person, minister, Harvard sociologist, an athlete and outdoorsman, an exuberant personality. He died in a locomotive automobile collision in the autumn of 1926. And finally, we're excited.